And we're live. Fabulous. Okay. Arnav, you want to start us off?
Yeah. So first of all, something about us. We are a non-profit organization, Earthrise, and what we aim and aspire to do is like inspire every single human being and spread awareness about how severe climate change is and how severe like because a lot of people might face this issue and there are a lot of future implications which might end up happening if we do not take proper and necessary action right now. And what we feel is by doing podcasts and talking with people who are like much more experienced than us, we could spread more awareness and gather more people into the community.
Yeah, and ultimately we're not trying to influence the entire world because that's obviously unrealistic. We're just trying to, affect our community and hopefully our community can affect others and it's a chain reaction that'll spread across, the country, the world, etc. But that's basically what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, to start off, could you please tell us about like your role in the UN? Like what do you do? What's your job?
What do I do? Um, I'm so it's thank you so much for having me here. I believe it's your first one, so I'm glad and honored to be your first guest, and definitely hope and pray, and I know I won't be the last one here. So all the best for this journey that you're on. Um,
Thank you.
so I currently work in the executive division of UN climate change, which also is known as the UN FCCC Secretariat. Um, I predominantly focus on strategy, on planning and delivery, and as well as a bit of communications and coordination. My In my current capacity, I support the executive secretary, the UN climate chief Simon Steele, in his role as the head of our organization and as the convener of the UN system for climate change.
Cool, cool. So what does that entail? Like, what is your day to day like, or like, what do you do on a like day to day basis?
So there's no straight answer to that. There's absolutely no 2 days which are similar for me. But I'd say an overarching trend for me is definitely is planning. So we are currently in a phase of our organization where we are planning for 2030 of where we would like to see the world be in 2030 in terms of their climate goals that the countries have set, and also how we as an organization can support countries and governments in delivering that. So my day revolves from meeting a lot of different stakeholders within the organization, coordinating plans on what they are going to deliver, whether it is externally facing, like what we do at the Conference of Parties, the COP every year, or what we do internally as well, which might be documentation, which might be research, which might be a coordination around our communication, which can be strategic planning and foresight, which can be different sort of meetings and conferences that happen throughout the year, but also things like budgeting, finance, HR, and stuff like that. So my team is basically responsible to oversee all the work that happens and to bring different stakeholders together within the organization. So if there's ways to connect people, that's our team. And my job in that is just to run around and see what we can do in the best way possible. So even though I run around a lot, I don't seem to be losing a lot of weight around here because there's a lot of fries that are available at every lunch and dinner I have. But yes, predominantly it would be coordinating between a lot of teams to deliver something. And right now I'm working, as I said, on the vision and the strategy for 2030 that we are currently developing.
Interesting. So what does that strategy entail? Like, what are you guys thinking about currently?
So there are two parts to the strategy. One is the one which is already delivered. If you've been following the climate space within the UN, you'll see that COP28, which was recently held in the UAE in December, was an extremely big one for us because it delivered something known as the global stocktake, which is basically a 5 year cycle to assess progress made on climate by countries against the Paris Agreement. And it's done every 5 years. This year was last year was the first time it was done. The next time would be in 2033. So countries agreed to certain goals that they will be that they will try to do by 2030. Similarly, for now, the work for us as a secretariat is how do we internalize that goals, whether it's to transition away from fossil fuels, whether it's to double energy efficiency, triple renewables, and all the other goals. How do we take those goals in and support parties? Parties in this context are the countries. So for us, it is how do we respond to the global stocktake, to the GST? How do we best maneuver internally to make plans to support transitioning away from fossil fuels, doubling energy efficiency, tripling renewables, doubling adaptation finance, and so on. So the strategy internally would be how do we improve the efficiency and effectiveness in helping countries? Because at the end of the day, we are a secretariat to the parties. We are supposed to assist, we are supposed to guide, mentor, convene, catalyze, but we are not supposed to implement. It's the government's responsibilities to implement. So our plans internally focus on how do we better support countries that need support? How do we better bring countries together that can really work together and need that coordination internally? And how do we spread the message of climate change in really layman terms outside of the negotiations that we do at every of our climate conferences?
Okay. Speaking of the Paris Agreement and all of those promises made, there was one which was talking about to keep the global emissions under 1.5 degree Celsius or 2, and that like hasn't been fulfilled according to I don't know our research. So do you like what do you think? What is the reason behind that, and like what can we do?
So, following the adoption of the Paris Agreement in at COP 21, it was expected that countries will extremely go forward and really adopt to it. However, there were some real unrealistic targets set, especially on developing countries to transition away from fossil fuels. Yes, we have definitely passed the 1.5-degree mark, but the overall aim of the UNFCCC of the convention from 1992 or the Paris or its Paris Agreement of 2015 is to limit that to that in by 2100 to 100. So there is still time. There is still time that we can limit it below 2 degrees, ideally under 1.5. Um, However, it is very clear that we have definitely passed that threshold. Why have those promises not been kept? Is a question which really no one has an answer to. But there definitely has not been a political will of countries and their leaders to make that transition into energy efficiency, especially around fossil fuels or other hard to abate industries. There has been a shift. The work is going on, and there has been definitely more solid promises made since the Paris Agreement. And I remain optimistic that at least by 2050, we will be able to see quite a lot of countries going net zero and developing countries by 2070, 2080. So ultimately, by 2100, we will be able to see maybe and hopefully limiting of 2 degrees.
So my question is then, how much longer until, like, if we don't pick up the pace, we're essentially like there has to be major changes put in place because currently, like, there's a lot of jargon thrown around in the media about like, oh, if we don't meet our climate goals by this date, we're essentially screwed. But according to many scientists, that's not absolutely true. It has some truth to it, but it's not absolutely true. So, like, what is the truth in that like scenario? Like, when is that date?
There is no date. There is no I'd say red clock on our on our walls in the office that shows that you are that this is the date that people will run out and the world will start burning. I would say the time has already run out. This year has been the hottest on record. There have been multiple catastrophes that have happened in the natural world last year and this. So I'd say we have run out of time. However, we've not reached the end of the road. We are in that. I'd say if you all play Temple Run or used to play Temple Run, I've definitely not played in a long time, but there's one period where the player becomes really really fast, and you never know when you're going to like die. So it's kind of we've reached that speed, I'd say, where we are moving very fast, and it's very critical that we are very, very careful in all the moves that we take. Um, the COP in Dubai was very, very, I'd say, ambitious, very, very welcoming, um, and I'd say that does give us a timeline to 2030 that we should be transitioning away. We should be doubling certain things, tripling certain things, stopping a lot of things by 2030. But in terms of that deadline, I think if we are able to peak emissions by 2030, by 2040, we'll be in a good space. Hopefully, yeah.
And going back to square one, could you please explain to everyone who's going to watch this what climate change is?
Yeah, in layman's terms for all the people out
In
there.
Yeah.
layman's terms of what climate change is, I really. So climate change is the way that the climate behaves with us is how I usually put it. Um, it is the change in global temperatures that affects every single person around the world, and it is not a temporary change, but rather a permanent shift of global paradigms worldwide, especially in the environmental spaces. I don't know if that was layman terms, but I've not been
That's
asked about the
fine.
definition of climate change for a very long time.
No, that's very good. And so then, what I want to ask you after that is that when it comes to that, that sort of not really frightening definition, but kind of strikingly motivating definition, I want to say. What do you think the biggest obstacle is in terms of policy that you're seeing amongst the nations when it comes to unifying them under one climate goal?
I'd say we are setting ourselves for failure if we are having only one unified climate goal. Yes, there is one North Star that we all have in the world, which is the Paris Agreement, the UNFCCC, the Kyoto Protocol, all the conventions, and all that. However, every country, every community has a different need and a different way to transition away from towards a sustainable future. So, if you look at, for example, most of the oil production countries, you cannot in any way or fashion ask them to stop producing oil tomorrow because they do not have anything else to do. However, if you give them a timeline and you tell them that by 2030 it is up to you to change, we do see that happening, and we are seeing it with either it's the UAE, whether it's Saudi Arabia, whether it's Brazil, or any of these major oil production oil product producing economies, trying to transition away from fossil fuels, um, or at least what's the word for it, or at least trying to
Compromise?
no like do I just forgot the word, but um, green credits is the term, but I'm not getting the word. Trying to do some good for the harm they're doing, basically. I'll get the word for you, while when it comes back to me. But um, so they are trying to do their best to control their emissions and move to more sustainable a future. However, if in terms of policy we are to look at climate change, it has to be domesticized. It has to be individual to each country and each community, and they need to have a plan for it, economy wide. It cannot be just focused on one particular sector of the economy. That's why it's not about the past that I would say is the problem. I would say I see it being a problem if it's not implemented, is that we are now in the cycle to produce the third round of the nationally determined contribution, which is the NDCs, which are basically the climate plans of each country, and they're due to be submitted in 2025. I believe personally that if countries miss this opportunity to really make their climate plans economy wide, bankable, as well as implementable, then we have a major policy problem on our hands. We've seen in the past that NDCs have been very weak, have been focused on not all sectors, and have also been not implemented as they should be. But this year, we really are focusing within the UN system, along with other partners, to really push countries in the direction to make their NDCs very, very strong and extremely, I'd say, implementable in the coming years. So,
What again? Oh,
sorry, yeah.
my fault. You can continue. I thought
So
you
I
were
would say
done.
that I would say would be the key thing I would look out for, rather than focusing on a problem in the past, which has been the lack of political will, and also the mistake that a lot of people make in assuming that everyone has the same speed with what they need to convert into a greener economy. So it has to be forward looking and forward leaning.
Yeah, for sure. So, okay, so let's transition away from more of like countries and organizations to like us as people, right? So obviously, some of the biggest, I guess, not appeal, some of the biggest ethos, let's use that word, to like the regular people is how it's going to affect them and their children in the future generations in a couple of years. And like that's mostly the fear of people, like average people, for global warming. So, what do you think the realistic ethical implications of climate change are on future generations? Not all of the, let's maybe say, fake stuff that people are seeing on social media that's meant to just scare them. What do you really think is going to happen if we don't like put a stop to this or put effective policy in place?
Simon Steele, our executive secretary, made a very unusual speech some days ago, according to a few. Unusual in the sense that people didn't expect him to be there. Um, he gave a speech to the Security Council of the UN, which usually deals with disarmament, international security, nuclear weapons, and stuff like that. And his speech was very poignant because he pointed out that there will be wars fought over natural resources. There will be there are wars being fought or because of climate conditions, which has led to droughts, people fighting over resources, stuff like that. And for people, that is what the future will look like. It isn't the dystopian future of everyone wearing oxygen masks and trading oxygen. Definitely, that's not where the world is headed. However, there will be challenges with our food systems, with food production. There will be challenges with the cycle of of seasons, which will lead to major disruptions with infrastructure, which will lead to major problems with other production lines, which will also lead to changes in the economy. Because if we are used to usually taking leaves, for example, during the summers, which is July, August, in Europe, but if the summer is now going to trend towards September, October, November, then there has to be serious changes made because schools need to change. Schools need to not start now in September, now need to start in October or November. I hail from India, where I was a month. I was in Hyderabad, my hometown, and usually in May we usually have a lot of mangoes. But when I was leaving Hyderabad is when the mango started arriving, and that's because there was no production of mango, or um, there was no delivery of mangoes because the rains had not come on time in July. They were delayed, so mangoes didn't start growing on time, and so on and so forth. It's a very small example of a thing which might be um, very minuscule for people to notice, but it is a trend that you start seeing develop. It's June. No, sorry. It's almost June here in Bonn. I'm in Germany in Bonn, and usually at this time it's summer. It's not peak summer, but it's summer. The sun is shining. We have good sunlight throughout the day, but it's right now raining outside, and it's 11 degrees. So definitely something's not right. And this is not a trend of like 1 or 2 days, but since I've been back 2 weeks ago, I've not seen, I maybe have seen 1 or 2 days of spring or summer, whatever they are. All the other days looked like they were back to winter and autumn for me. So the way climate affects people will not be the way that people imagine it to be, which is we won't have oxygen to breathe, we won't have drinking water. Obviously, those might things might also be coming up, but the first realities will be the change in our food habits, the change in our economic cycles, in our jobs, and in the way that we usually deal with life. Definitely, climate will increase prices, the cost of living will go up, and that at some point will start trickling down to every single person in the country, and not just those at the bottom.
So, because everything's interconnected, right?
Yeah,
If one thing falls, the education system, everything, it just falls. It's like a dominoes thing,
yeah.
right? If one piece falls, and climate itself means it's a long-term change. So this has been happening since a very long time, right? And so what, as you, okay, you said there's no certain time when we might see all of this, but still, can you give us like an estimate of when we might?
I would say we've already started seeing the changes. We've
Yeah.
For
already
sure,
started
for
feeling
sure,
some of
for
the
sure.
very drastic moves in
Yeah.
our climate systems. However, if you're looking for a very drastic move, I can tell you that 2030 is a deadline we should be meeting. We should be really looking towards 2030, whether it's with the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN, whether it's to do with the climate goals that that the global stocktake has set, and we should really try to peak our emissions before that so that it starts going on the downward trend. Um, However, I think we already started seeing it, but it's just going to get worse. The best hope for us is to remain on track and continue living this way rather than it going down.
Mhm.
So, I mean, we've been talking like kind of pessimistically, not really, but like it's a hard topic for people to swallow because saying like bluntly, like yeah, we have a deadline. If we don't finish it by now, like then we may have some very strong implications towards like our standards of living, and that's hard for people to like digest. So, is there anything you can tell us to, like tell people that hey, like it'll be okay if we do this, this, and this as common people? Obviously, there's not much we can do. However, is there anything that we can do?
No, there is actually, I completely agree with you, and we at the UN climate change really do focus on the good rather than the bad. Because whenever you talk about climate, it's all about we are dying, the world is ending, there's nothing we can do, everyone can go to their graves and just sit there. That's all everyone says whenever it's about climate. And even if you look at the activist sides, it's all about that. Oh, you're growing oil, you will die. Unfortunately, that's how life is. You're not The oil is not going to stop. Oil will keep producing. All we can do is just make sure that it's in a sustainable manner and we're able to control our emissions. So I think that there's a concept I really like. It's cabinet rooms, boardrooms and living rooms, that the climate conversation really needs to be strong in these three areas. Cabinet rooms, obviously, because it's a political decision at the end of the day. Boardrooms, because governments, there's a very interesting fact that there's that if you mix the Fortune 500 companies in the world, they would be, I think, the one of the top 10 country. They would be in the list of the top 10 country emitters if you take a consolidation of Fortune 500 companies. So it's critical that boardrooms of various organizations and entities really take that decision, but it eventually trickles down to living rooms, which is common people, and how the climate conversation really needs to become more positive, needs to become something that people attach themselves with, uh, more with solutions rather than problems. It's not about that you can't do anything. Neither it is about using a sustainable bottle or not carrying a tote bag to the supermarket. Yes, you're doing something in that area and it's protecting the environment a lot. However, it has to go way beyond that. It can't be that shallow how people participate in climate conversations. So my way to look at it before I join the UN would definitely be one, make myself more aware, which is something you guys are doing right now. Um, Second, obviously practice sustainable living. The third would be to actually look at your climate plans that the country is doing and actually contribute to that conversation. Whether it's to create awareness on social media, whether it's to advocate with people that you're meeting, or whether it's to just have a conversation. Nothing is too small, but if you completely forget about it and behave like there's nothing you can do, then we are definitely heading to the abyss and there's nothing that can be done. So it is vital that people across the world really take part in conversations, take part in advocacy measures, and really focus towards that element of I'd say enriching behavior that that can really push us forward and push boardrooms and cabinet rooms alike to take decisions for the betterment of the planet. Because you and I alone can't do something, but we definitely can take steps that can push others who might be much more powerful to take drastic steps that affect all of us.
Right.
For sure. Do you think that climate change, I mean, I feel like this is an obvious question, but do you feel like climate change has become a politically polarized topic?
Um, I would say it's become a polarized topic. I wouldn't say it's become a politically polarized topic because, but to disagree with it is something um, I would strongly voice out because when you look at climate, there is nothing you can be against. The science is right, it's happening, we're seeing it. Yes, there are opinions about how it's a propaganda of a certain people and it's not happening and stuff like that and they can respect their wishes all they and they can respect their opinions for all they want. However, I believe it's not become a topic of political polarization yet. However, it should have been, which is quite concerning. Yes, it is a topic of quiet conversation in the US. We are also looking and monitoring it closely to see because if President Trump is re-elected, he might pull out of the Paris Agreement, and that will have consequences on the global structure of climate negotiations. However, there has been a tendency of the Republican Party to also support climate initiatives, not publicly and declare it to be climate change, but they have seen it. So I don't think it's become a political topic as of yet as it should be, or at the level that you and I expected or thought it is, but it's definitely something that polarizes people, but not to the extent of yes and no, but to the extent of what can we really do? It's just happening, and they just become natural to it rather than taking a side and saying it's not happening.
Yeah, sure. I mean, for teenagers especially, obviously, I feel like our generation is the people who should have these conversations the most, since we will be entering, the workforce, political conversations, all of that. And I think the time when that policy needs to be really hammered down when we're all in our 30s, it's 2050, we have to really put the initiative then. So to us, to people who, to probably the demographic who's going to be watching this podcast, what do you say to them to make a change, to make any actionable change that'll motivate them to continue pushing on for the cause? Because conversations and all of that they will do with anyone, but like we've been trying to do that, and most people just feel demotivated and they feel hopeless.
Uh, that is, I'd say, a sad reality of climate change. That we have unfortunately gone to a place where we are not motivated by anything to do in climate. However, this is not the time to lose hope. This is not the time to recede into your bedrooms and watch more reels on Instagram. It's rather a time to focus on how do you actually can communicate better, and how do you really impact some people that you can. It's never about I was never a sustainable person. I'm still not anywhere remotely close to being sustainable. Um, However, I'd say what I am is that I realize that my choices do have an impact, um, and every small step can contribute towards saving the environment. However, my efforts would be more focused on how do I, if I'm taking 10 steps, how do I convince three others to take 10 steps with me? Um, there are things you cannot avoid. There is, there are things you can avoid, and there are things you should avoid. If you can stop the things you should avoid, which is definitely more emission focused, which might be one, s- stopping the false negativity around climate change, for example. The things you can stop is obviously things which are very simple, which is use less plastic, renewables, um, plant more trees, all that stuff. And the things you can't stop is definitely airplane travel. You cannot stop it. You have to do it. There's no other alternative, unfortunately, for people your and my age. Um, or using electricity in your house, which is relevant. So there can be steps which will can be taken on that spectrum. Things which are very very useful would be things you can stop right now. Then would be steps to take it more. But then the highest call of, I'd say, duty would be to actually go ahead and stop denying the reality that it affects you. You cannot live in 2024 in any part of the world and say that the climate isn't changing. So that would be the first step that I would um, definitely put out there.
Yeah, so basically, people agreeing on this is an actual issue and we have to take some steps. And speaking about like steps, if you had 60 seconds to, you know, tell something to the world about what can they do, what can one person individually do, as in steps or anything, what would you say against fighting climate change?
Hmm. Okay. Are we putting 60 seconds on the clock, or can I just?
No, no, you
You can
can.
just
I'm
go.
just,
All
yeah.
right.
I'll keep track.
Yeah, but I'm not going to either stick with 60 seconds or go beyond it. So let's just see how it goes.
Yeah.
If I'm addressing the world, I would definitely focus on three things. One would be to really listen to climate conversations, to listen to what's happening around the world. whether it impacts you or do not. I really maybe 6 7 years ago didn't care what's happening in the Caribbean, didn't care what's happening in Pakistan, didn't care what's happening in Indonesia. However, it is a reality. If a city such as Jakarta is sinking, then it's very soon that other countries around the world will also face the same impact. The second thing is to stop looking at mainstream media as a source of information. Um, whether it is in the US, whether it's in the UK, whether it's in India, Germany, or anywhere around the world, mainstream media always have an indication of what they want to show rather than what you want to listen or what you should be listening to.
Hmm.
Climate, especially, is polarizing in that factor. So I would advise the world to really look at actually what's happening around the world in a very clear context. That would give you the reality and the push to actually go ahead and do the third thing, which is to really have climate conversations in your living rooms, in your boardrooms, and push them towards your cabinet rooms. If the country mobilizes, then there will be no way to stop the country that you live in and the government that runs it to actually take steps to signify how climate change is an important political agenda. It's now a novelty item. It is something that everyone should do, and it's really nice to put on your manifestos, but no one does it because it has a, a price to pay for it. So, pushing that conversation forward is very important and very keen to really take ahead. And the last tip that I would give my fellow citizens of the world would be to not feel disheartened. We have time. We don't have an unlimited time. We have time. However, it has to be focused, implementable, and direct action that we take at whatever levels we are to really stop the climate from getting worse. We can't make it better, but we definitely can't make it worse.
Thank
Was
you
that
for
60
that.
seconds?
That was a minute and a half, but
Okay,
we'll take it. We'll take it.
Yeah, we'll do it. Yeah.
perfect.
I just want to shift into one last, kind of subsection before, we end this off. Well, let's start off with something fun. What is a surprising fact about climate change that you think most people don't know?
Is a surprising fact. Can I open ChatGPT and check?
Yeah.
I would say that climate is one thing that every country agrees upon. Um, we, the Conference of the Parties, which is the COP, has been running every year since 1992. It's the 30. This year we'll be having it. Is COP 29, and almost every year we've had a unanimous decision on the climate goals. Yes, it's not been as strong as everyone wants it to be, but it is something all 198 countries of the world agree to. It has, it is one of the only bodies within the UN system, or only, I'd say, arrangements within the UN system that require 100% consensus. So, climate, that's a fun fact that climate every year requires 100% consensus. And if all countries have agreed to transition away from fossil fuels at this COP, is a very positive sign that climate is actually more of a unifier than a divider. Similar to how COVID was, where everyone was unified against COVID. However, COVID was killing us instantly. Climate kills us, um,
Yeah,
I'd
over
say,
time.
over time.
Over time,
However,
yeah.
the fun part about it is that it's one thing that no one disagrees about. It's the good old uncle in our family that everyone loves. So really take care of that uncle and make him come to every dinner rather than seeing him once a year.
That was that was fabulous. Thank you for
That's
that.
a nice answer, yeah.
And then the last subsection I want to talk to you about is technology, is the current industries that are rising up to combat climate change. Because obviously all of this policy and implementation is fantastic, but actually implementing it requires alternatives to what we're using right now. And so some of those alternatives that we've been seeing in the last decade have been electric vehicles, have been solar panels, have been renewable energy. And so, what do you think has been the most promising one of those industries to sprout up in the last couple of years that has actually made an impact, or you think will make a great impact in the future to combating climate change and setting our world on a more renewable path?
Funnily, I'm looking right in front, and I have my McLaren Lego, my F1 Lego there, and I was just thinking of if F1 can be climate neutral, anyone can. Um, Technology is definitely an enabler of climate goals. It's a means of implementing climate ambition um, and action. However, if you tell me that, if you ask me to list down certain initiatives that might actually promote it, I might not have the right knowledge to do that. However, what I definitely do know is that there are different sorts of technology that really enable us. You speak of the hardware technology, whether that's electric vehicles or sustainable farming or hydroponics or stuff like that. I would actually go back to also talk about the software aspects like AI, like metaverse systems or data transition, which is absolutely essential these days to map out climate realities. It is technology that's brought us so far to actually go ahead and understand the realities and significance of climate change. However, the hardware aspect of it, whether it's electric vehicles, whether it is whether it's solar panels on our roofs or everything, has a climate impact to it. Like, you need to produce that many batteries, and you need to have that much lithium to actually make those batteries and those solar panels, and that leads to more wastage as well. However, definitely reduces on fossil fuel. So I would say that technology is that enabler, whether it is improving the technology that we drill fossil fuels from to reduce the emissions and low grade waste that comes out of it, whether it's to improve other sorts forms of getting energy, or improving the way we build our buildings using less cement and concrete, or if it's even technology such as social media and enabling us to actually connect with each other and share that. So I would not restrict technology to one aspect, but actually call it as a great means of implementing climate ambition.
Mhm.
Thank you for
Okay.
that. Yeah.
So, two questions from that. The first one, you mentioned metaverse, right? So how does the metaverse connect to climate change? It's I know the metaverse is you can be inside a virtual world. It's a mix of AR and VR. But are you gonna go into that virtual world and spread more awareness, or what can you do? That's
No,
the
I would
first.
I would actually use it as a means of promoting how the world can look like and how the world will not look
Yeah.
like. I
Okay.
would not use metaverse as a dystopian future of saying, how, look how beautiful the cherry blossoms look on my garden if the world would be this. However, it is extremely important to use technology in the way it's intended to be. Now, I cannot escape into that metaverse and behave that that's my new world and that's where I'm living. At the end of the day, I need to go back to my bed in my room. However, if I can use it for advocacy, if I can use it for pitching to someone of how a climate goal can look like, whether I'm creating a sustainable community within metaverse and showing it to investors to create funds for developing that within an area, that's what I would that's still a victory and moving towards that ambition of economic and social connect that metaverse can be used for.
No, yeah, that's a beautiful application actually. I couldn't think of that. And the second one is, as we're like so much reliant on fossil fuels as of now, and it is also one of those factors which has contributed the most, or like it's it has to be in the top five at least. Is there any way we can reduce it? Are there any alternatives? Or
We as
what is your
people,
say on
you, me, or we as the global community?
we yeah, the everyone,
Okay.
the people.
Um, no, we cannot reduce fossil fuel overnight. Um, there's definitely things that I see around your like backgrounds, and you'll see around my backgrounds that have been made with fossil fuels, and we'll continue to use them. It is impossible to stop using fossil fuels completely. I do not personally, obviously, this is not the opinion of the UN climate change. I personally do not see a future where fossil fuels are completely eradicated from the planet. We have enough and more fossil fuels to keep us going forever because fossil fuels keeps on developing. Um, However, do I see a reality where fossil fuels can be minimized? Yes. But in what sense is still to be determined. Can ships and airplanes run on renewables? Maybe not in the next 20, 30 years. Can cars run? Yes. Can can we reduce the use of fossil fuels in the production of clothes, in the production of plastics? Yes. India is moving towards a future um, where plastic might be completely banned. In a country of 1.2 billion people, that was not a reality I saw 5 years ago when I was studying environment science in school. Not 5 years ago; it's been more than that. But yeah, um, but that was not to add to that. There is ways to offset. That's the word I was looking for earlier. Offset. There's ways to offset our emissions, and it's vital that we move towards that carbon neutral future. So, if there is fossil fuel usage in the world, in whatever way, fashion, form, we should have means to neutralize that impact and to make it extremely um, minimized on the way that it impacts with climate. By offsetting, obviously, I don't mean that if you're driving for 20 kilometers with a petrol car, you plant one tree. No, there has to be ways we offset it in a more sustainable fashion and in a more impactful fashion. It can't be um, an eye for an eye job. It has to be something which is much more greater and much more feasible, and not from an individual standpoint. Yes, from an individual standpoint, from a great to have aspect, but it has to be from the production and the transmission angle at the top. So if a country is producing 100 billion, 100,000 liters of petrol, of petrol in say 2 hours, they should find ways to offset it in those 2 hours itself, rather than it being the consumer who offsets it.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're implying that like we should have like I guess in like 20, 30 years a system where each time we like do something a bit unsustainable, we have checks in place to make sure that that is compensated for, essentially making like a kind of a hybrid system.
We need it in the next 20, 30 days. We have it. There are a lot of ways you can offset your own carbon emissions. The UN does it in something called the Greening the Blue initiative that we have. A lot of companies do it. A lot of companies have sustainability, very, very strong sustainability tracks towards it. But it's not legalized, it's not legislative necessity in all countries. That's where we should be heading. That should be a policy target for a lot of countries and a lot of communities and businesses to have, that we move towards a carbon neutral future. The UN asks most countries to be climate neutral by 2050 or earlier. For example, China has asked for I think 2080. I'm not sure, but like that's the timeline they've set. India has set 2070, while UK changed it some days ago, but it was still within the 2040, 2030 timeline. So every country, every plan should be resonating with that carbon neutral future that we are looking towards. But that doesn't only mean fossil fuels. That can be a lot of different elements and sectors of the economy that we usually don't think about. Whether it's cement, whether it is whether it's construction, whether it's traveling, whether it is steel, or so many others which have great emission levels.
For sure. Well, thank you so much. I mean, this has been amazing. Arnav, is there anything else you want to touch on?
No, I think we're done.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
for
you.
having me. It
Okay,
was
wait.
lovely talking to all of you.
Yes.